a nationally recognized expert in student loan reform, and a powerful voice in health and wellness advocacy. Mary has made history as the first full-time default manager in the country and has spent the last 37 years shaping every major law and federal regulation related to student loan default prevention since 1988. She continues to work with policymakers, including the Trump administration, on real solutions to student loan crisis. Mary is the founder and CEO of Champion College Services, and her work has impacted over 3 million students. Her book, Injustice for All, exposes systemic corruption in the education reporting and details of a courageous decision to turn evidence against the U.S. Department of Education in 2014 and 2015. But Mary's journey doesn't stop at policy reform. After surviving a near death experience and a rare blood infection with a 3% survival rate, she healed herself and her daughter, who was born with rare Lyme disease. From Lyme disease and multiple co-infections, her new book, Over, Over My Dead Body, chronicles the decade-long battle and offers hope, research, healing strategies, and others facing similar health challenges. Mary's story is one of resilience, advocacy, and transformation. Whether she's fighting for students or helping others reclaim her health, she brings unmatched insight and inspiration. We're honored to welcome Mary to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to
I,
have
I
you on.
actually go by Mary Lynn.
Oh, good,
Um,
Mary Lyn.
my mom's from Georgia, so we all had two names.
I'm from Louisiana. I know all those people.
I always laugh because when my brother was little, we called him Billy Neal, and I
Oh,
just
really?
thought that was hilarious.
That's too funny. So, Mary Lynn, I'm going to ask you my favorite question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh boy. Um, you know, if I go back to the beginning of my growth journey, I was 22 years old. And one of my clients, I was selling investment art at an art gallery in Houston, Texas. And it was right before the oil market crashed. And my clients, it was a man and his wife, and they came in and he gave me a cassette tape of Think and Grow Rich. And it was Earl Nightingale's recording of the shorter version, not the whole book, but the shorter version. And I listened to that every night, every morning. I did everything it said. And when they gave that to me, I had two pieces of furniture. And the mattress I had purchased, I bought for, it was a king size mattress I got for $25, and we folded it in half like a taco to get it through the door. So I was very broke. And I did everything that book told me to do. And I mean, I had 3x5 cards. I actually found them when I moved. I just found them from way back when. I had signs up all over my mirrors. The only piece of art I had was my vision board. And my friends used to give me such a hard time. And because they'd come in and go, "Nice decorations, Mary Lynn." But you know what? They're all proud of me now because I'm a self-made millionaire, and it was through a lot of hard work. That the number one thing, and I've studied with Tony Robbins. I was a plat partner for years, and several other people that are big in the personal development industry. And the number one uh, the number one path to success is your mindset. If you don't have your mind in the right place, then you're never going to heal. You're never going to make any difference in the world. It's hard to get through the days sometimes. And when you start realizing that you have control over what and how you think, it can change your world.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. I love that. That's gives some good background about your journey and your life story.
Yeah, thank you.
So you've had a remarkable career in education, reform, and advocacy. Can you kind of share how your life shifted from when you began experiencing when you began experiencing mysterious health symptoms?
Well, that didn't happen until I was really in my 40s. And prior to that, I was somewhat of a maniac. I was a professional dancer. My biggest claim to fame is that I was a dancer on the first live broadcast of MTV. I was
Wow.
19 years old, and nobody had ever heard of MTV. And it was more like American Bandstand back then. And so, they said, "This is how much you're going to get paid." And I was like, "Where do I sign?" I had no idea what it was. And so that's my claim to fame. So I was a dancer. I was a skier, a world class skier, and I skied like that. I was a extreme skier. So when I say I was a bit of a maniac, like I was the person jumping off of cliffs and jumping out of helicopters, and it was usually me and a bunch of guys. And I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. And I did that until I was 38 years old, and I was still ranked in the top 5 to 10% of skiers in the world at that point. And then I got pregnant. My daughter was a surprise gift, and I had her when I was 39 years old, and I got bit by a tick the first month I was pregnant. So she was actually born with Lyme disease.
Wow.
And then, as a maniac would do after I gave birth, I started working out like crazy again, got to lose the weight and get back in shape. And I was working out and getting weaker and weaker. And nobody could explain it. And I kept hearing this, well, at your age, and I'm thinking, I'm 40. What are you talking about? Like, you know, I was just jumping out of helicopters a year ago, that it made no sense at all. And I've also been into health food and diet, organic diet since I was in my 20s. That journey also began then. And you know, my doctor would say, "You're the healthiest person I know and the unhealthiest person I know all at the same time." And he was from Hawaii. He was actually my dance partner when this all started. Um, but he had no experience with Lyme disease. And I just went from doctor to doctor to doctor, and nobody could give me answers. It took 6.5 years to diagnose me. And by the time I was diagnosed, I could barely walk up a flight of stairs. And, I was a single mom and running companies and flying all over the country and going to Washington to write laws. In fact, I nearly died. I got a blood infection from the IV port in 2008. And the higher education bill passed on August 14th, and I nearly died the week of Labor Day. So this week is a big anniversary for me, because it was the point where I I was laying in bed, my skin was gray, my hair had fallen out, um, my guts were falling out, and I was just laying in bed and praying that I wouldn't die. And I crossed over numerous times. And I also had a brother who died the same year I was born. And it was 2 weeks before his fourth birthday. And I had always felt him my whole life. I could feel him. We were connected. And so I considered him one of my angels. And when I crossed over, he was there. Um, sorry, it's still emotional.
Yeah, I bet.
um, he was there, and I said, "Oh, you're here to take me into the light." And it was literally like a white tunnel of light. And he said, "No, I'm here to tell you it's not your time. You're going back." I was kind of like, okay. And then we had this conversation that was very similar to siblings, giving me a hard time, and I really didn't want to leave my daughter because she was only 7 years old at the time. And then it felt like I was falling, and when you're out of your body, you don't feel the pain. It's very beautiful and peaceful, and I was in excruciating pain. I mean that you're a guy, so um, it's hard for men to relate to it, but it made a childbirth feel like a broken nail.
Oh wow.
It was so painful, and I refused to take pain medicine because that was the only way I knew whether the antibiotics were working or not. And I had a therapist that kept saying, I this man's wife had the same pattern that you had, and they found out the name of the infection right before she died, and it was too late. And she said, but you have the same pattern. So I called her up on the Tuesday after Labor Day, and I said, can you please get a hold of this man and get the name of the infection? And she called him, and he was out of town, and he said he would be back on Friday. And she said, I don't think my patient's going to last that long. And so he called his son and had the son pull his mom's medical records and get us the name of the blood infection. And they got me on the right antibiotics, and that saved my life. You know, two people I've never met. I wrote them a huge thank you note. And and so that was the turnaround. And there were so many God moments that I was given insights, and I don't, I have no explanation for it. And a lot of the things that happen still to this day, I have no explanation for it except that God's leading me. And and so from that point, I was significantly better, and so was my daughter. We discovered quite a few things. I used an energetic device, and I had one back then, and that was like the old computer days where it was this rather large device. Now it's like the size of a cell phone. Um, and and I saw patterns, and I figured a lot of it out through that. However, the biggest answers came through just these insights that would drop into my lap. And um, over Christmas, I put my daughter and me both on this Greens First cleanse, and because I thought we have to get all these medications out, because at one point I was taking 300 pills a day. I was getting
Wow.
12 IVs a week and taking about 300 pills a day. Elizabeth was only 5 when we were diagnosed, so she wasn't taking as many, and her infection wasn't as bad as mine. Probably there was some filter there, because she caught it in utero. Um, but we both got extremely sick. And I went back to the doctor, and he said, your blood infection is back. And it freaked me out. And he was on the phone trying to figure out what antibiotic to put me on. And I was reading the research materials about the blood infection on his computer. And there was no testing facility in the United States at that time for that blood infection. The testing facility was in France. And it said it had a biofilm. And right before they did the emergency surgery to take my IV port out, they were taking blood out of the port, and all this white stuff went into the syringe. And the doctors they're like, what is this? There was 4 doctors in the clinic when it happened. Nobody knew what it was. And I was being a smarty and said, if that's fat, can we take some of it out of my butt? But I can't help myself. Anyway, it came back from the lab that it was a fibrinogen material, and the research back then was fairly new about biofilm, and so I knew there was biofilm associated with Lyme disease. And now, at that point, I saw that it was also associated with this blood infection. And what we figured out was that the enzymes in the Greens First cleanse that were plant enzymes, fruit and vegetables, were dissolving the biofilm, and it let the pathogen back out. So we did a protocol of rotating through various enzymes at the same time we were on antibiotics. And about 6 weeks into that, my daughter, I had kept her active, but even in gymnastics, she would she would get really tired and have to rest in between each event. She would do something and then she'd have to lay down on the mat. And she came home from school and it was a Monday and she said, "Mommy, it's the best Monday of my life." And I said, "Why, honey?" And she said, "Because I'm not tired." And that's when I knew that we had it. And it took longer for my blood infection to go away. And actually, at that time, I had been appointed to a negotiating team in Washington, and I was negotiating the higher education bill that passed in 2008, right before I almost died. And I was still on antibiotics for all this stuff when I went to Washington, and it's very, very intense. And the bellman had to carry me to my room one day. I was so exhausted, I didn't have any energy to even walk to my room, but I was going there anyway because education was my passion. And and we got through that, and we've been Lyme free ever since. Like our immune systems have gotten stronger, um, physically stronger. I skied this winter, and we got our lives back. And my daughter graduated from college with honors, and I'm so proud of her. And and the cognitive challenges were the probably the most difficult thing for her. And she developed in that with the pathogens. So that's a short version of our story.
Oh, that's a powerful story. When did you realize, though, during the story, that the medical profession wasn't going to be able to help you? You had to become your own detective.
Well, when they first told me that I had Lyme disease, I had heard about it, but I really didn't know anything about it. And so I'm a researcher. I like digging, and I go down a lot of rabbit holes, which probably saved my life. And every time they would tell me something, I'd go and research it. And so I became very knowledgeable about the subject matter. And then the people with Lyme disease at our clinic, we called it the IV room. Like everybody in there had Lyme disease, and we were all getting IVs. And I had this energetic device, and I started testing everybody in the room and seeing patterns. That the people who were severely ill had a pattern of high amounts of heavy metals, high viral loads, which the viral loads happen when your immune system is down. So your immune system down, your viruses take off. So you get food allergies, you have all of these symptoms that are a result of your immune system being weak. And then as you build your immune system back up, um, the food allergies start going away, and the viruses. Well, I found a fabulous product for the viruses. That was a God moment for sure. My doctor sent me to go pick up some medications, and when I got to the distributor, this was sitting on the counter, and I was like, "What is that?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, you need to know about this product." Like it was a fluke, because I think that's the only time I ever went to pick up medicine for him. So and I happened to find this product, and it's the product that it's called Humacell, and it encapsulates the virus so it can't attach to a host cell, so it doesn't replicate. So it works on everything: Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, HHV6, herpes, shingles, COVID, um, and and just getting rid of the viruses builds your immune system up because they're so taxing on the body. But that's where I started. And my daughter was 5, and I didn't want to leave her, and I didn't want her to be sick, so I was highly motivated to find answers. I didn't want her to suffer. It's the word. I was upset when I knew I had it, but when he said, "You're how about your daughter? You can get this in utero," and my heart sunk. It, it's hard to describe how desperate you feel when you know your child is ill.
Wow. So, part one of your book, we just kind of gave that story. Part two of your book, you deal with the research that you went through, the protocols that worked for you, What are some of the most surprising or empowering discoveries you made during that part of your search?
Um, well, one of the things, um, well, the heavy metals is a big deal. That wasn't really surprising to me because I grew up in a mining town. Like, where did you get all these? I used to be the kid that was in the sand dunes playing with the little balls of mercury. They were like this big, and you could move them, and they jiggle and everything. Yeah, I was playing with those, and then I would play with the lead, like get a magnet, and we'd have contests to see who could get the highest strings of lead. I mean, that was like our playground. So that wasn't a shocker. Um, but one of the things that I figured out in about 2007 was that people were resonating for tuberculosis. It was a like a mutation of tuberculosis, and tuberculosis is a mycotoxin. And at the time, I thought it was coming into people from the vaccines. I mean, that was really the only insight that I had at the time. And so I agreed to do a protocol, 6-week protocol of streptomycin, which is a injection. My daughter, we used a oral that's not as effective, but I didn't want her to have the side effects of the injection, which could be hearing loss, and I thought she was too young to take a risk like that. Um, and the die-off was so great that I smelled like a ride animal. It was horrible. And I was still dancing at the time, and my dance partner was my doctor, and we were doing a Latin cha-cha routine. Um, and every time I raised my arm, I'd be like, I am so sorry. Because it just smelled terribly. And then the die-off was tremendous. And so we thought at the time that the Lyme was feeding off of the mycotoxin, because all of the infection rates started coming down. And in December of 2019, the CDC finally released a report saying that humans could contract tuberculosis from deer.
Wow.
And so, 12 years later, it became public that it was actually a co-infection of the Lyme, and that's how it came into the body. But most people had that piece of it. Um, and the mycotoxins, I see those on every single scan that I do. When I take people on, I do a full body scan. Um, it's $495 to do the scan, and if you got traditional medical tests for all of that, it would be tens of thousands of dollars to get the same amount of information that I get in a scan. It doesn't spit out the answers. You have to look for the patterns, and then everybody's a little bit different. So Lyme has 46 different mutations of DNA. It mutates into 14 different life forms. There's a ton of co-infections. And then you have to take into consideration the person's past and what they've had. Because, like, when you start dissolving biofilm, it'll let anything out, anything they've ever had. So when I start working with somebody, I have to do extensive research, because, say, if somebody had like a septic infection in the past and they've got Lyme disease, and I know we're going to start dissolving the biofilm, we have to get antibiotics for all of it, because if it comes out, you have to address it. And
Wow.
sometimes they're pathogens that could kill somebody. Like you have to take it very seriously, and I have to work with the doctors, because the enzymes also thin the blood. Like, whenever you take enzymes, if you're also on blood thinners, you have to be very, very careful, because your blood will get too thin. So I just keep researching. I keep finding new things and different answers. Um, there's a new it's not a new product line, but it's new products for a company that I've been using for a long time. And it's a detox program using hemp and CBD. And it actually pulls the toxins not just from around the cells, but from the interior of the cells. And those products are supposed to be available on the 15th. And I've got a group of people already where we're going to do a baseline scan and then a scan after each of the cleanses. I'm so excited about it because the faster I can get somebody well, the better. They have to be as dedicated to it as I am, and um, and some people can go faster than others. I'm a get it over with girl, so I just want to blast through things. That's just my personality. It's like, okay, let's get it over. Give me everything. And and some people can't handle that. I mean, I've worked with people that have had Lyme disease for 30, 40, 50 years. And so they've been sick for a long time, and that's where the mindset becomes part of the protocol, is because you have to sometimes pull people out from being more addicted to the or more committed to the illness than they are to their healing.
So let's dig into that because I know people are probably hearing this going, you just talked about how Lyme disease is impacting so many people. How would someone figure out if they're dealing with some form of Lyme disease that's they may be unaware of, like you were, that's infecting their health?
Well, there's a ton of different symptoms, and a lot of times the diagnoses are based on the symptoms. Similar to lupus. A lot of people have heard of more about lupus than Lyme disease. So when you have so many symptoms, um, you can get a diagnosis that way, and a lot of the tests are very inaccurate um, because of all the different stages of the Lyme disease. So it if you start getting severe neuropathy, most people do. And what I've figured out is that where the biofilm is growing is where the symptoms start showing up. For example, if the biofilm is growing on the connective tissue, the connective tissue, like if you've ever, you know, dealt with the raw chicken meat, that's that slimy stuff that's around the muscle bed, and that's connective tissue. It goes through our whole body, and it has nerve endings in it. And so when that becomes stiff, like when somebody's dehydrated, it becomes stiff. And that's why your muscles don't move well when you're dehydrated. So if the biofilm is growing on that connective tissue, it becomes stiff. And so it's supposed to be like a, a pathway in between your muscles so that they can move back and forth like that. And when it becomes stiff, your muscles are sticking. And that presents as fibromyalgia. Um, if it's growing in your brain, it presents as foggy thinking. And you also have a lot of toxins. Lyme releases neurotoxins on a regular basis. So um, it's hard to think straight. And that's a lot of the reason why. I really couldn't hear because the biofilm had formed on my eardrum.
Oh my word.
Um, it forms around your joints, and it's kind of hard to describe, but like your your back and neck crack a lot, and it's difficult for a chiropractor to get you back in alignment. And as the infection goes away, your back starts aligning better. Um, so there's a ton of different symptoms that can happen. A lot of people are misdiagnosed with MS, Parkinson's, a lot of the neurological diseases, fibromyalgia. Um, because of the swelling in the brain, a lot of people exhibit psychosis type symptoms, which it's really a lot of swollen brain, and the tissue eventually does get damaged. Um, However, there's really great ways to repair the body, and that's one of the fascinating things about science and the human body is that once it's not in a fighting mode, then it starts cleaning itself up. Um, for example, when somebody's a smoker and they say, "Well, I never had this cough until I stopped smoking." Well, that's because when you're smoking and you're constantly introducing these toxins to um, your body's doing everything that can to filter out and handle what's coming in. And when you stop introducing new toxins, then it starts going, oh, let's get this old stuff out of here. And it'll just start like purging, purging, purging. And then they get the cough because your lungs all of a sudden are trying to get all of the toxins out of them. So your body will naturally do whatever it needs to do to survive. So if it's fighting infections and fighting neurotoxins and all of these things, and there's a lot going on with Lyme, um, then your body's in a survival mode.
So
Uh,
you're an expert. You say you're kind of an expert on your own body. We are experts on our own body. What
mhm.
advice do you have for people who are dealing with or navigating through chronic illness?
um, the main thing is that you need to advocate for yourself. Um, there's a lot of Lyme literate doctors out there, and what I've discovered is that many of them are people who have Lyme themselves. And if you're working with a doctor who has not healed themselves, then you probably need to take a look at a different doctor, or bring in somebody like me that can work with the doctor because it, everybody is different in this journey. People say, well, can you just give me like the protocol? Well, no, because everybody's different. It mutates in different ways, it has all these different combinations. And Lyme is an intelligent infection, which most infections these days are intelligent. Like, that's why it's difficult to have any efficiency in the flu vaccine because it mutates every year, and the scientists are guessing at how they think it's going to mutate next year. And if they're wrong, then you just put all the stuff in your body and it's not going to do anything. And it's the same thing with Lyme. It mutates, so you have to these people that are on like doxycycline is the number one go-to medication for the doctors, and it is a good medication for Lyme. However, when you put somebody on it for 6 months or a year and you don't change anything up, the Lyme recognizes it. It's like, yeah, it's kind of doing, woohoo, come over and get me over here. I'm hiding in the biofilm. And then it becomes this hide and seek game. And people who say they're in remission, all that means is that the pathogen is inside the biofilm if you haven't dissolved the biofilm. And so it truly is a journey, and you have to pay attention. If your symptoms change, you have to pay attention to it. And people need to start listening to their own bodies and doing their own research. Um, I can tell you that the tools in my toolkit are usually the same tools for everybody. However, I use them in a different order, if that makes sense.
It does. So if somebody were to reach out to you and ask for help, what would you start with them? Just kind of give them a sense of what they would be experiencing.
Well, there's really three stages of healing with we call it the Lyme crusher, is our protocol. And I've packaged a program that includes 3 to 4 months of products. It includes superfoods, it includes cleanses, it includes regular scans. Um, I'm very active with my clients. We're usually texting all the time, and at the end of it, we're usually really good friends. And I don't want I don't want a patient for life. I want a friend for life. I want to see people out living their lives again. I have no connection to like this will just make them sick forever so I can keep treating them. I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in that. So the three stages are the prepare stage, which is a lot of cleansing and building up the body's strength. Because if your detox pathways are clogged, then you're never going to make it through the killing stage without a whole lot of discomfort and putting your health in real danger, truthfully. So Lyme releases neurotoxins and does all these things to you. So we want to get all of that out of the body, and it's usually very clogged up when I take somebody on, like their liver's clogged, their kidneys are clogged, their lymphatic system is clogged. A lot of them have skin issues. Those are the four main pathways for getting rid of toxins. So we have to open up those pathways and clean them out. Then we bring down like the viral load and all of, I call them opportunistic infections. It's everything that happens when your body becomes weak. Um, the the scan results that we get show what foods they're allergic to, and the more compromised your immune system is, the more foods you'll be allergic to. So I ask them, I can't force anybody to do anything, but I ask them to stay away from those foods for the time being, because every little bit of stress that your body has on it is is energy that you're taking away from healing the main pathogen that's causing all this weakness. So the first part we call prepare. And so that's detoxing and building up the body's strength. And then when we get to a certain aspect of it, that which is, and that includes heavy metals, parasites, the organs cleaning, like it's very comprehensive. Then when we get past that stage, I have to work with a physician. Um, and that's when we start introducing the products that break down the biofilm and the medications used for killing the Lyme. And Lyme is a spirochete, so um, it looks like a corkscrew, so it can actually like pierce cell membranes,
Ooh, wee.
and it's the same pathogen family as syphilis. So people think that this is not transmissible from human to human, and that is absolutely false. Um, my daughter got it in utero. It's just now coming out that that happens. I've known, she's 24 now, so I've known that since we were diagnosed. Um, it can be passed sexually. And so when you have a family, you really have to treat the family, as especially the couple, but the children can, because otherwise you just pass it back and forth. Like, you're not going to heal if you can't get your spouse. You either have to practice safe sex, or they need to be treated too. Um, and sometimes that's a shock because they're not always on board with that. Um, so it it's at that point we address all of that. Um, and then I do the scan every 2 weeks so that I can see, that this form is active right now. So let's switch from A to B, or whatever is going on with the person. This is the part where it's the most different for people, is they when we're actually killing the pathogens. And one of the co-infections is called babesia, which is similar to malaria, and that is usually the last to go. That seems to be the most difficult to get rid of. Um, and it's the same protocol as people use to get rid of malaria. And if you've ever looked into that or gone to Africa or anything, there's a milder malaria and there's a more aggressive malaria. And it's a lot of times we have to use the same protocol as the more aggressive malaria to actually get rid of that one. So it's really tick-borne diseases, not just Lyme disease. People just traditionally kind of wrap them all together under that name, but it's really tick-borne illnesses. And I've through researching, um, people come to me and it's like, well, there's the Lyme going on, but they have other things going on. And what I've discovered is that every chronic illness that I've encountered has a biofilm.
Hmm.
It does similar things to the body's immune system. So that piece of it is similar, where you have to do the detoxes, and we detox the entire time, because you're cleaning up the body. Then when you actually kill the pathogens, you have to have a pathway to get the neurotoxins out, which go up because they puke out the neurotoxins when they die. And then there's, people don't like to hear this part, but the dead carcasses. You
Oh,
have to get those out of the body, because they're actual physical things that are floating around in your body at that point. So we detox through that stage as well. And then the last part of it is detoxing all of the medications and everything that they just went through. And you have to reprogram the immune system. So the immune system at that point is like hyperreactive. Um, like my daughter was in the second grade when we got rid of it, and the first few times that she got a cold after we got rid of the Lyme disease, she would have 104 fever. Like, it just went, her little immune system was like, oh no, we're sick again, and it's just overreacting. And so we had to reprogram it to go, it's okay, it's just a cold, and and then and then build the body back up and make sure you're getting the right nutrients. And then ideally, I want to have people that have good health for the rest of their lives. So when I'm working with somebody, I explain everything. You get a tremendous amount of information and protocols and what they do and why they're on them, because I'm not just going to give somebody something and go, just trust me, take this. I want them to understand why they're taking it. And the whole reason I started this company originally, was that the cost of this is tremendous, because most of it's not covered by health insurance. Um, and so I wanted to be able to offer products and services at a discount, because when I was going through this, I had both my daughter and me, and so a lot of the equipment and the products I would buy myself, because when you're having to pay for all this stuff for two people, after a while it's like, well, it makes more sense for me to have my own ozone machine. It makes more sense for me to have my own red light machine. So I have all this equipment, and um, that supports the healing and building the body up. And so that's the last stage of it, is really building the body back up, the immune system back up, getting everything to work right again. Um, like, they told me they didn't know if my organs would ever work right again. And a lot of that was from the blood infection, but that also happens with when you have Lyme disease for a long time. And today I'm on about a third of the thyroid medicine that I was on for years. Um, and that's really the only thing I take.
wow. So
Um,
where can
yeah.
people connect with you and find out more about what you do?
Well, we have a website. It's championforlife.com. And, and it's really about health and wellness, physically and emotionally. Um, the emotional component of it is, uh, it's key. And, I talked about mindset earlier. So when you break the word Lyme in two, it's lie and me. And so I ask people to think about, what lie are you telling yourself? What lie am I telling me that's keeping me from getting well? And for people who've had Lyme for a long time, their support system usually ends up being other people that have Lyme disease because their friends and family completely don't understand it. I can't tell you how many times you hear, well, you look fine and you're dying inside. And um, people get impatient with you. They don't understand why you can't remember things or do things that used to be easy. They just don't understand it. I have one patient whose husband was like, "Yeah, I just don't believe this," and she had had it since she was 13 years old. Like he didn't know her well, like in a well state,
Right.
and he really didn't believe her until she started getting well, and then he was like, oh, maybe there is something to this. And so now all of a sudden he's going, oh, I guess you did have something because he had never experienced her well. And she was she this summer she was up hiking in Zion National Park and doing all the with a backpack on, and I just love that. I get calls from my clients. Like one of my clients is a minister, and I think she was about 3 weeks into the program, and she said, I did a wedding this weekend and I was on my feet all day. And she said, I even danced. And, to somebody else that might not mean a lot, but to somebody who's been unable to do anything, some people have been on disability for years, and you see these people starting to get their lives back. You have like the one woman, she said, I had a normal period, and she hadn't had one in 7 years because your blood gets very viscose, like very thick. It's hypercoagulated, and so even your blood flow doesn't work well. And so she had a regular period, or just you just see people getting their lives back, and it's like every one of those stories is a miracle.
Wow.
And
Well, Mary,
so, yeah, I just want to help as many people as possible, and I would like to share one more story,
sure.
um, because this was so impactful for me. I already had a belief that we go through the things that we go through in life, and that ends up building our experiences to lead us in a direction of purpose. And, um, I tell people all the time, like, I grew up in a very abusive home. My brother died in that home. And um, I tell people you can either use your adversities in life as an excuse for your behavior or a reason for making a change. And so that was my mindset going into this training. And the training I went to was Tony Robbins' Date with Destiny. And I had been there before. And so it wasn't my first time taking the class, but he went into a meditation and he says, go back to your first memory. And like, oh my gosh, I've been working on my parent thing for years. I'm just going to be open. And so I just opened up, and God came in, and he showed me how much it hurt him to allow me to be hurt like I've been hurt during my life, so that I could fulfill my purpose for being here. But having him show me I that God had to make choices to allow me to be beaten as a child and raped, and to go through the whole Lyme trauma and almost die, and it was all for a purpose. So with the abuse from my childhood, I built numerous businesses in the education industry, and through my companies I've worked with over 3 million students, and I've affected nearly 4 decades of college students through lawmaking and regulatory making. And and then because I went through the Lyme disease and the blood infection and I almost died, I I have answers. I have a way to make people well. And it might not get everybody well, but it'll get you significantly healthier. And if we can get everybody well, that's my goal. But just knowing that there was purpose behind all of that pain, and that God shared in the grief and the pain of it with me.
Wow, Mary, that's powerful. Thank you. And that's a great way for us to wrap this up. Thank you for what you do and the impact that you're having on people's lives. Because so blessings on what you're doing.
Thank you very much.